if you don't know your students, then you might think that you have a lesson plan that's going to go over well, or some strategies that are going to work. And then all of a sudden you try them and they fall flat. I like to think of this as like actually getting to know the student as a person. Like, what are their interests? What do they like? What they don't like? And then bringing that into your classroom. And one of the easiest ways I always try to do this is figuring out what kids like, and then buying a t-shirt that has that on it, and not mentioning anything, but like showing up with like a Minecraft t-shirt on. And it just sends this message like, I'm listening and I've heard you. And it's an opportunity for like a conversation starter about something that's not school related.
Part of this knowing your students is reviewing the information that's available in the system, whatever that looks like. And I know that is time consuming, but there's a lot of stuff that comes with a kiddo that allows you to kind of get some background information and pieces that isn't the stuff that travels through the grapevine. Have conversations with parents or adults who's in their circle of care. Who is it that are their caregivers, and what insights can those people offer you about this person?
And from an evidence-based practice point, I think that this links really well to Bronfenbrenner's work around like this ecological model of where we have these like spheres of influence around a child. If you were to actually draw that out for each child in your classroom, and who would be in that first sphere, kind of whether that's caregivers, siblings, those types of things. Because a lot of times we know that like whole families travel through our schools. So we might be able to build on some of that background knowledge, going to talk to other teachers where the siblings are in, their various classrooms. But then even outside of that, like, does this child play soccer, or what are some of the other areas? Because especially if you have a child, like we're talking about inclusion, where we're talking about every child, but especially we're talking about kids that might have these extra needs, where when we know a little bit more around those spheres of influence, does this child see specialists outside of the home? Are these people that I should be talking with? And just getting a sense of like, are we all on the same page? So Bronfenbrenner's work really supports that. Also, the neurorelational framework supports that. Of when we get up into the branches of the tree, we have these opportunities to ensure that we are being holistic in our care. And sometimes it only takes one or two conversations in a whole school year, but to make those connections. If you've ever had children in your care who are in foster care, where we have these success in schools meetings. So foster care kids get that, but sometimes we don't give that to all of the kids in our care. Well, why not? Why are we not talking to everybody in this child's circle, even just once or twice a year, to make sure that we are knowing our students well enough to then provide for them what they need in that classroom?
How can I provide a relationship which this person, this tiny, medium, or large sized human, may use for his own personal growth? So it's not about fixing someone, curing someone, changing someone. It's about offering a relationship to them that helps them grow as a human. That's the aim.
When we look at behavioral strategies and some of the psychology behind that when all people are given a choice, then it offers them freedom. It offers them a way out. In a classroom, for example, I actually saw recently some great work by teachers who are going back to center-based learning for all grades, where it's like, you got to hit these centers throughout. Say you have the same centers for 2-3 weeks to cover all the material, but like you have to hit all of them. So when you come in a day and maybe you're feeling more like doing some individualized worksheet type work, or you're over here and you're working with manipulatives, or you're over here, you're working on the Chromebook, just giving that choice and agency, so that when a child comes in, and whether they're not feeling great that day, or you notice that they always avoid a certain type of work, that's where then you can, go in and provide that support. So it really gives this child this sense of freedom and agency that often gets taken away if we're following a traditional teacher at the front of the class teaching everybody model.
Problem we sometimes run into when we talk about choice is that it makes it sound like it's a free-for-all zoo party in our classroom. And sometimes choice is two desirable things that you want them to do. You just don't care what order they do it in. So would you like to do A or B? Both are getting done at some point, but we're going to give the illusion of the choice that they can pick the most desirable task at this point in time. I think the other part that fits in with this idea or under the umbrella of choice is student self-advocacy. So teaching our kiddos, all kiddos, that they can have conversations with the adults in the room to say, I need support with this, or I would prefer to do it this other way. We can advocate for our own needs and our own preferences without coming across as jerky or privileged or spoiled. Giving students the skills to practice in low stakes, no stakes contexts to build self advocacy skills, um, super important and allows them to be successful further down the line.
And it also crosses over into so many realms around mental health where when I'm working with clients on that side, and I work with a lot of kids who are in school, and we talk about this a lot of, say, for example, you have a child diagnosed with ADHD and they have just certain strategies that help them learn better or help them focus better in the classroom. And it's like, well, I could advocate for you, or you could advocate for yourself. And I think it's powerful when you sit down with kids, like they really know themselves well. And I think sometimes we don't have the opportunity, like school's busy. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of time for those types of conversations, but those types of conversations are the ones that bear the most fruit, where then we have children who know themselves well and can tell us what they need, that then we can follow up with that. And that also reduces behaviors because we're not butting heads. Like it's like, and every single child that I've had that type of conversation with around advocacy for their needs, every every idea they've come up with, they understand the rules. They actually do a really good job of understanding what's appropriate and what's acceptable at school and what they can or cannot do. For example, one child was like, "Can I listen to music on my Chromebook while I'm working, like while we're doing individual work, because it masks the sound from everybody else and helps me focus?" And I was like, almost every single adult in the world will have some form of earbud in and listening to music while they're doing work by themselves. Why are we not allowing children to do that? Because we have this notion that, like, if they're not fully attending to everything in the room all at once, that they're not paying attention. So as soon as we start to do that, where then we start to see this like level of confidence build in children. And that is one of our jobs as teachers, is to build confidence and then to also know how to ask for help. That all of those pieces come down under this strategy of offering choice and agency to children. And this is across all grades. And of course, it's going to look different in all grades, where preschool, kindergarten, it might be a first then card, and they get to decide what goes in the first spot and what goes in the then spot. When you're getting into elementary grades, it might be, these are all the things that we need to get done today. Let's have a classroom conversation as to what we think, we can achieve. Where do these things fit best? Having, again, a center-based model where this is all the work that needs to get done, but you can rotate through it. You can have a choice to sit over here or stand over there. And we talk about that a little bit further in one of our other strategies. And then into high school, where high school, like, yes, a lot of it is direct teaching. You got to get through the content, but maybe having choices as to how they get to display their knowledge. What are all of the ways that children can tell us that they understand what they've been taught? So all of that can come together to help support children learning how to advocate for themselves and feeling like they have some sense of freedom and choice within the school-based model that we all work under.
One of the things that I think is really important is that we model our own strategies for making choices. So let's say in a day, I have an undesirable task that needs to be done. It probably involves dishes or laundry. And so do I do the task right away so it's finished? Or do I do a desirable task like reading a chapter in my book first to mentally prepare myself for the horrible task that is looming in my future? And talking to students about how some days I want to do the task I least like first to get it off my plate, and then I'll do all the fun stuff. And then other days I actually need a dose of fun, and then I'll do the unfun stuff. And talking through that thinking with kiddos so that they can develop their own strategies for making choices.
So being an adult that models those things and models even how they're feeling about stuff, like it's okay to say to kids, I don't love learning about fractions either, let's be honest, but we have to get it done. So what are some ways, do you guys have ideas of ways we can make this fun? Can we maybe earn ourselves a reward when we're done this work? Can we split it up in different ways? Like, it's okay to be honest and transparent with children, obviously within certain parameters, but give them the opportunity to let you know what they think about things because you've modeled to them that you guys have similar thoughts and feelings about pieces of work in the classroom. Every part of our life is governed by some form of rule and routine. And it's a wide kind of swath that is cut as to what works for certain people. But what we do know is that, again, we all work in a similar system of school starts at a certain time and ends at a certain time. And within these hours, we have to get these things done. And within this time, we will also have time for breaks and time for recess and time to see your friends and time to eat. Children are not born knowing what those pieces are. We do have this sense of like our internal rhythms and when we're hungry and when we need a bathroom break and those types of things, which I do think we need to honor in children and give them the opportunity to let us know what their body is saying. But that still needs to be within a framework so that everybody is kind of traveling through the day and able to do the things that need to be done. These need to be taught. Again, children aren't born knowing how to line up at the water fountain. It's not an innate thing. They're not born learning how to walk down the hallway without bumping into everybody. So they need to be established. They need to be taught just as much as, multiplication needs to be taught. And then they need to be reinforced throughout the year. We can't expect that children are going to do this once or twice and then come back from Christmas break and instantly remember how to do some of these things.
When we see the routines falter, then that's a sign for us to go back and reteach and remind. And there's nothing wrong with that. And with all of the other pieces that we know are helpful to student learning, like offering flexible seating and choice at times around where and how they sit and learn in a classroom space, movement breaks, getting ready for small group instruction, all of those have routines and structures in place to allow those things to go smoothly. Because when we talk about minutes of instruction and losing a minute here and a minute there doesn't feel like much in a day, but then times that by the 180 days plus that you're at school, and all of a sudden we're losing like an entire day of instruction to poorly managed routine movement or transition time. So thinking about how to do these things efficiently, how we practice them, and it does seem like it takes forever, but that's time well spent later on when your kids become efficient in doing those transitions, in those pieces. And let's face it, we all function better in routine, right? The Tiny Habits guy, BJ Fogg, functions, and his work is all about building the habit, building the routine so that you remember to do the thing that you're trying to do or the goal you're trying to accomplish. And so knowing there's a predictable routine happening in a day, whether it's our mornings always look like this, or our Mondays always look like this, or Friday means this, that goes a long way in settling everyone, not just the kiddos, into learning. And that doesn't mean you can't change it up, because things happen. Fire drills, assemblies, a really great book. Those all can interrupt your day. But we plan for the interruptions, but the routine has to be in place.
Predictability is also a trauma-informed practice where when we see that oftentimes when kiddos come to us that have experienced adversity, it's often shaped around these moments of, we don't know what's happening, we don't know what's going on. And so having that predictability can be really key in helping kids feel safe in your classroom. A good place to start is just like neurobiologically why they are important. So if we are under any sort of stress response, whether that is like a negative or a positive, one of the first things that happens is that our ability to like hear things goes down. So and also different frequency of hearing. So our ability to hear a typical human voice is less. So when we even just look at the science of like if we're in a busy classroom and things are happening, and maybe we have a child who comes in under a stress response, something happened at recess, something happened at school, where they're just really excited, they're looking forward to the assembly coming up. All of these things that can act as like distractors to a child's nervous system doesn't really set them up well to then come in, sit, and listen to what the teacher is saying, and then absorb it, put it into short-term working memory, and then be able to retrieve it later. So from a scientific perspective, having some form of a visual cue can be really helpful in tying all of these pieces together. Also, your words only last as long as they are, the air is passing through your vocal folds. So whereas visuals are much more concrete and static, and again, can offer some of that predictability, especially when we're using the same visuals over and over and over again. They might just change order. And so having this information that supports some of the other good tier one strategies that we've already talked about, like rules and routines, even choice and agency, can be represented in a visual. And this is from preschool to grade 12. It just is going to look different based on the age of the child. But even if we think about it as adults, like I look around my desk and I have visuals everywhere. I have visual reminders everywhere. Now I am the one that gets to determine what goes up and what is being reminded of. Children are relying on us to let them know what they need to be doing and what is coming up next. And so having that displayed in your classroom is not only neurobiologically sound, but is also then going to further support your positive classroom management, because you're not going to have to be repeating yourself over and over again, because we can refer to this visual. And once the children then, like, even referring to the visuals is one of those routines that needs to be taught. Let's all go look over here and let's see what's coming up next. And then from there, we can then add whatever visuals are necessary to make sure that we're communicating our expectations clearly. Mm-hmm.
One of the things we talked about in our session was how visual supports can look many different ways and offer support in for students in different spaces, really. And so we can offer them schedules and timers to talk about procedural or temporal supports, like when things are going to happen. We can have things like choice boards or social scripts to help talk about how things happen, right? Walking us through the process. And we can have spatial supports where certain areas are labeled, or spaces or cubbies, or, visual borders, like this is your personal space that no one can come in unless you let them. Those are all different visuals that we can offer students to help them better understand their role, the classroom, the routine, the day.
Yeah. And then the other piece that came up with a few of our specialists was like placement and use of the visuals. So for example, having, say, like a strip of letters or numbers up on the wall versus having it on the child's desk so that they don't have to look up and reference. So just being aware of like, why do I think that this visual might be helpful, and where would be the best placement for it based on the students who might need it. And then this also kind of ties into, using visuals to break down component parts. So you might have, this is our biology 30 block, but then within this class, this is kind of the to-do list of what we're going to be going through today. That's also just goes down to like basic good lesson planning of like, you should know what is happening, but we then very rarely communicate that to kids. And then even having it like in a visual representation, where then you could have like a checklist. This is something that is often given to, say, students with ADHD who need help with tracking and help with that time management. But there's a lot of kids in our class that could arguably benefit from that. And so something like that could be something that is on a desk. It could be up on a whiteboard. It could be somewhere on the wall. So just attending to like, what is this visual trying to accomplish for this child? What is kind of that skill gap that it's filling? And then where would be the best placement for that?
One of the things that goes along with visuals as well is visual clutter. We don't need to display every anchor chart that ever existed. In
Yeah.
fact, research is telling us that wherever you teach the most, your front space needs to be as light as possible, which unfortunately is where most of us stick everything. And
Yeah.
so move that stuff to other places, teach our kiddos where they're going to be. So if they want to reference that particular chart at another time, it's going to live over here, and only bring focus to the visuals that are needed for that time and space and that lesson. Um, and if you have something like a smart board or TV or like whatever we're calling it, the display space, um,
Mhm.
shut it off when you're not using it, or put on something that's soothing or calming. So we just need to be mindful of the stuff, right? The visual things that might be cluttering the learning. That extends to the page as well. So if you have the habit of offering up some really visually overwhelming handouts, teach students to cover up parts of the page that don't matter, and like we're just going to focus on this question, or we're just going to focus over here today.
So even if you're looking into like older classrooms where you might have some form of a chart that helps with a certain learning concept, it should be up for the amount of time that you require it as a cue, but then it should be taken away. So one thing, a strategy that you might want to use when it comes to teaching and planning is that when you're working on, say, your month-long plan, like put a reminder in your calendar to review clutter and organization in the classroom. And you might have to schedule yourself some time to go through and be like, oh, this is from like 2 months ago. It needs to come off the wall. This is looking a little bit cluttered over here. Maybe I should swap this out for something else that is actually conducive to the learning, because we learn this in early education that the classroom is your third teacher. And I think sometimes that gets lost in older grades where we see space and we want to fill it with things. But that also needs to be an intentional process. And so if you're looking at your classroom as being just in general, that environment is another tier one strategy of having a good, conducive learning environment. There is a lot of research around having things organized and especially visually organized so that children can place their focus on what it's intended. And that's the wonderful lesson plan that you were trying to execute in that moment.